Okay. Well, yeah. Well, welcome. Thanks to everybody for joining us. I'm Johnathan Hettinger. I'm the Communications Director for the Park County Environmental Council. I'm thrilled to host another community conversation today. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about the Montana wolf hunt. As I'm sure everyone has heard, the last year was a record-breaking hunt where 21 wolves were killed in the hunting districts 313 and 316 near Gardner and Cook City and Silvergate, just north of Yellowstone. At least 25 wolves were killed in Yellowstone overall, bringing the park's population down to 89 wolves, at least before the new pups were born. And now today we're going to talk about kind of what that meant and what that means for the next season. So recently, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks released a 10 wolf quota for a combined hunting district throughout the north, basically edge of the park in Park County. So those two districts, 313 and 316, are now combined into one. And the FWP says that there could be up to 10 wolves taken from that. We at PCEC believe this is too many wolves to hunt, especially after a record-setting year this past season. And we recently worked with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, NRDC, Bear Creek Council, and National Park Conservation Association to submit a public comment about that. And we're hoping that everyone here today can help submit public comments too as we move forward in the next week or so. So first, I'm going to do a quick introduction about PCEC, and then I'll pass it over to our guests. But first, a little Zoom reminder. Please mute your computer and be respectful of all of our speakers. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat as they arise, and we'll have plenty of time to go through them at the end of the presentation and discussion. And as always, today's presentation is recorded and we'll share it on our website and YouTube channel. Park County Environmental Council is your community conservation group with 650 contributing members and 3,000 supporters here in Park County. We work to safeguard the land, water, wildlife, and people in Yellowstone's Northern Gateway through grassroots organizing and advocacy. Park County is the traditional homeland and current home to many indigenous people, including the Apsalica and Crow tribe. And Park County has a long history of human habitation, of people who love, cherish, and stewarded this place. And we're committed to working together to honor this legacy and this place for future generations. We've been hosting community conversations for the past several years, and we think they're really valuable. Our goal is to help us all learn and gain a shared understanding of the most pressing issues we face as a community so that we can work together to be more knowledgeable and prepared to advocate for this place. We believe that by working together, we as a whole community can build the vision that we want of what we want to become rather than letting other people decide what will happen to us. If you think that all sounds good, please go to our website, pcecmt.org, and join our mailing list. Or even better, now's a great time to donate to PCEC through the Give a Hoot campaign. And all donations will be matched through the end of July. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone and introduce our friends and speakers today. Jennifer Sherry of NRDC will be speaking about the wolf hunt this year and kind of just giving us information about what is proposed and what happened last year. And then Evan Stout of Yellowstone Wildlife Guide Company, Shauna Baron, another guide in the park, Nathan Varley of Yellowstone Wolf Tracker and president of Bear Creek Council, and Ashea Mills of Walking Shadow Ecology Tours of Yellowstone are all here to share their experiences as guides in the park and local business owners. So first, I guess I'll pass it to Jenny.
Thanks, Johnathan, and I'm excited to be part of this community conversation today. As Johnathan mentioned, I work for NRDC as a wildlife science and policy specialist, and I primarily focus on wolf and grizzly bear conservation. And I'm sure most of you on this call are well aware that this issue of hunting wolves along border of Yellowstone National Park, it's long been a contentious issue in Montana. And to sort of kick off this conversation, I wanted to start by providing just a bit of background of what has led up to where we're at today, tying in some of the sort of historical, social, and legal factors that are, I think, pushing and pulling these decisions about wolf management in different directions. And as Johnathan mentioned, our Fish and Wildlife Commission currently has a proposal on the table that they're considering. There's, things that are relevant to wolves across the entire state, but we're going to focus primarily in this conversation on this issue of reestablishing quotas in these wolf management units just north of Yellowstone, 313 and 316. But happy to try to answer questions about more statewide issues later. So looking back, and for those of you that have been in this region for a long time, you're probably as familiar or more than me. Montana has worked to create these special units and a quota system to regulate wolf hunting and trapping in the areas north of the park pretty much since the time that wolves were delisted in 2011. And the quotas started around, 3 or 4 wolves in the earlier days. Over time, they were reduced to 2 wolves per unit and eventually to 1 wolf per unit. So we have this long precedent and tradition of decision makers recognizing that this small sliver of Montana merits special attention when it comes to setting wolf hunting and trapping regulations. And that, according to many decision makers in the last decade or more, these areas warrant stricter regulations because of the unique nature of these wolves and Yellowstone. So as the quota numbers were slowly coming down in the years after delisting, it triggered certain legislators to use their political positions to try to prevent the closure of wolf hunting and trapping in those units north of Yellowstone. So in 2013, the legislature of Montana passed House Bill 73, which actually prohibits the state from closing off areas adjacent to national parks to wolf hunting or trapping unless quotas are established and then met. So what that means today is that the commission cannot legally set a quota of 0 in these areas, but they can still set any quota above 0, including 1. And I think that bill that I mentioned from 2013 is just an early example of politicians sort of meddling in the details of wolf management to protect the interests of certain user groups over others. And so for many years after that time, Montana's Fish and Wildlife Commission maintained very low quotas in these areas adjacent to the parks. And there was a commission season setting procedure where the commission in 2020 was looking at how they would set the regulations for the 2020 to 21 wolf hunting and trapping season. And at that time, the quota was at 2 in each of the 2 units, and they voted to bring it down to 1. And it was a really interesting discussion and decision at that time because the commissioners were sharing a sentiment publicly, and you can go back and watch the recordings of this still, that their sentiment was, we have a duty to represent the interests of all Montanans, not just those that want to hunt and trap wolves and not just those that want to see wolves killed. And they also noted that this decision of determining a quota, it's not really a biological decision, but it's a social one. There's not really a biological rationale to say we should be killing 10 wolves versus 1. But instead, they described their rationale as feeling this duty to represent the diverse Montana public, including those who value wolves alive and enjoy opportunities to see wolves. So, I think there's been this sort of precedent of commissioners trying to make decisions in a more balanced and moderate way for these particular units. But when Gianforte was elected, he nominated new members of the commission, save for one carryover from the Bullock administration, Pat Byworth. And so in 2021, when they were making their decisions about the season, the next wolf hunting and trapping season, they decided to strip away the Yellowstone quotas entirely. And, that was a change that broke with many years of precedent in this state of having a very low quota. And of course, as I'm sure most of you know, the result was this really dramatic increase in hunting and trapping of Yellowstone wolves last year. And I think Johnathan mentioned 21 wolves were killed in the two units, 313 and 316. I believe 19 were identified as park wolves. And just to put those numbers a little bit into context, that means that park wolves accounted for 7% of all the wolves killed statewide in Montana last season. And if you just look at Region 3, park wolves accounted for 22% of the wolves killed in that region. So I think it just demonstrates that the impact of Montana's wolf hunting and trapping season on Yellowstone wolves was wildly outsized as a result of the commission eliminating the quotas. I think the commissioners have often framed this decision as being something that is required of them or necessary in order to meet the legislative intent of certain bills that passed in our most recent state legislative session in 2021. Once again, we saw politicians sort of stepping in, taking over the reins of wildlife management decision-making, and they did pass a series of bills that do, to some extent, direct the commission how to manage wolves. And perhaps the most influential of those bills was Senate Bill 314 that was sponsored by Senator Bob Brown. It passed into law, and it does dictate that the commission, and I'll quote from the language of the bill, the commission shall establish by rule hunting and trapping seasons for wolves with the intent to reduce the wolf population in this state to a sustainable level. And then it goes on a bit beyond that. But I think the point here is this word shall establish. There is sort of a legal mandate that the commission shall reduce the wolf population in the state. However, the language of the bill is actually fairly vague, and it leaves a lot of discretion in the commission's hands to make these decisions. So the law doesn't really tell the commission how they should go about reducing the wolf population, which hunting and trapping tools to allow where, how quickly a population reduction needs to be achieved, or even how much to reduce the wolf population. There's quite a lot of discretion and authority in the hands of the commission, even despite this bill. And in fact, I've seen FWP suggest in multiple places that the wolf population in the state is already on a slightly declining trend in recent years, and therefore the legislative intent may already be met without further liberalization of wolf hunting and trapping compared to previous years. And then, one more thing I wanted to clarify about this sort of legal and policy history is that none of the wolf-related legislation specifically referenced these areas adjacent to the parks. There was no talk of wolf management units 313 and 316. So how did it come up that they did away with the quotas when it didn't come down through Senate Bill 314 or other bills? But certainly there were some, I think, strings being pulled behind the scenes. So during the last season setting, FWP presented the commission with a range of options. So this was what dictated our last wolf hunting and trapping season. And they presented this range of options going from sort of most limited to most aggressive approach to wolf hunting and trapping. And in those options, they included for the commission this question of you can retain the quotas at these units at 1 and 1, or you can eliminate the quotas. And the commission made the decision to opt for the most aggressive and liberal approach and eliminated the quotas entirely. But certainly it's within their authority to reinstate the quotas back at 1 if they choose to do so. And, that is, I think, one of the big questions coming up and is under consideration that they're going to vote on at their next meeting on August 25th. And then the last thing I wanted to do is just kind of lay out the key changes in this new proposal that's under consideration that are most relevant to these units north of Yellowstone. Johnathan provided a little bit of insight already there, but just to sort of further clarify and elaborate. So the three key changes I see are that firstly, they're proposing to combine wolf management units 313 and 316 into one single unit. And it appears that that will encompass the same boundaries as the initial 2 units, but now they'll be managed as one, and they'll call it Wolf Management Unit 313. Second, they propose to implement a quota of 10 wolves for hunting and trapping within that newly combined unit 313. Those 10 wolves are also being sort of separated out from the larger regional threshold in Region 3. So they're saying we're going to allow 82 wolves to be killed in Region 3 and also 10 wolves in these units north of Yellowstone. I'll just point out that, from NRDC's perspective, we agree with PCEC's point that a quota of 10 is still extremely high. It's extremely high compared to what we've had for many years prior. And I would say that that number was determined based on some probably faulty and outdated estimates of how many wolves are in this area and what kind of mortality they can sustain while slightly seeing a slight decrease in their population. And then the last key change is that once the quota is reached, FWP is proposing to close the unit upon a 24-hour notice rather than a 12-hour notice, which is what we had before. And then they're removing the authorization for the commission to initiate an emergency closure at any time. So I think this last point, it clearly makes it more likely that hunters and trappers could blow past the quota by extending the time of notice. So hopefully that provides something of a foundation for others to build on, other speakers on this call. But the last thing I'll share is just that I think local perspectives really matter in these decisions. The proposal from FWP, I think it includes some fairly nonsensical sort of calculations that try to provide a justification for instituting a quota of 10 wolves. But ultimately, I think this is a social calculation for the commission. And maybe they sort of worked backwards to try to come up with a biological justification. Identifying this quota of 10 is a step, a very, very small step towards taking a moderate approach. But FWP's proposal states that vocal public sentiment has favored limitation on future harvest in this area. And I think they're saying that, they are hearing from the public and they're trying to incorporate that into their decision making. And so I think continuing to really elevate the public sentiment is what can help change the outcome of this decision and hopefully lead to a lower quota. So I'll stop there and just thank you so much, PCEC, for providing this platform for community discussion.
Thanks, Jenny. And yeah, next I wanted to introduce some of our guides, Evan Stout and Shauna Baron, to discuss what this means for wolves, what this means for their businesses, what this means for the communities of Gardner, Cook City, Silvergate, even Paradise Valley. One of the really great, one of the things that come out of this has been the formation of a group called Wild Livelihoods, which is a really great local new group with more than 150 business members and that are working together to advocate for this place, because so many people in this community make a living because of the wild ecosystem and the wonder that is a lot of the wolves, and that is Yellowstone, is the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and the Yellowstone River. And so PCEC is a member of Wild Livelihoods, and so are many other local businesses. And we recently released a tourism study through Wild Livelihoods that found that over $236 million is spent in Park County each year by out-of-state travelers, creating 3,270 jobs. So 3 out of 5 jobs in Park County are created by out-of-state spending. And that study also found that wildlife watching, including wolf watching, leads to more than $82 million of spending in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And Carrie, thank you for putting the link in the chat if you want to look at that. And then, yeah, so I just wanted to mention that and pass it on to Evan and Shauna to discuss this more.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just to introduce myself, my name is Evan Stout. I'm a business owner down in Gardner. I own Yellowstone Wildlife Guide Company, and my company focuses on wildlife watching tours through the North Gate into the Northern Range primarily. And a lot of my business and travelers who are here to come on tours with me are here to see wolves. As a member of Wild Livelihoods, we're trying to make a strong effort to let the state know and let travelers know and the local communities know that there's a large number of businesses here in Southern Park County, from Paradise Valley over to Gardner and Cook City and Jardine. And we recognize that folks are coming to Montana and they're traveling here because of our beautiful landscape and the wildlife that lives on it. And we very strongly feel that it's time for those industries and those businesses to have a seat at the table when it comes to making decisions about how wolves are managed. Specifically, Yellowstone is the best place in the world to come and see a wild wolf and have an opportunity to see a wild wolf. And with the hunt last year, and probably even with the proposals that are in place for next year, the reality of being able to come and see a wild wolf on the natural landscape in Yellowstone Park is getting less and less. My business and a number of other folks here are dependent on not just there being wolves on the landscape, because the reality is there's wolves all over a lot of North America. There's a lot of different places where wolves live, but Yellowstone in the Northern Range are where they're most visible. And if we lose a lot more wolves, we're losing opportunities, obviously, to see those animals, but there's also huge effects on the animals that survive the hunt. And those remaining pack members who are still on the landscape, they become less visible, they become less likely for me to be able to show someone. And it really starts to put our businesses at risk. And combining what's going on with wolf management and the way our wolves are kind of being persecuted here, and when you add the effects of the flood that happened last month to some of our businesses that took huge economic hits there, and combine it with another really harsh wolf season that could be coming down the pike, it really makes a small business like mine hard to see as viable, in the year's future, if we don't do as best we can to protect the animals along the northern boundary of the park. And so that's kind of, as a small business owner and a Wild Livelihoods member, that's kind of my perspective on what's going on here. And the economics research paper that Jonathan mentioned earlier kind of lays all that out, and how big some of those numbers are and how important some of those numbers are. And it all comes down to what happens here on the boundary in 313 and 316.
Thanks, Evan. He said most of what we really needed to get out there. As a guide here in the park, I've been working in the park here off and on since 1995, and I've been here full-time since 2003. And so I've been here even when we had quotas in place. Perfect example of that was in 2012 when we lost one of our main alpha females of a pack that was highly visible for us that year, when the famous 06 female, or 832, was killed from the Lamar Canyon pack. I can tell you, I calculated how much money I lost that year just due to her loss. And so not only was it an emotional blow for all of us, because this was an animal that we knew from the time she was a puppy, and our guests were very excited about seeing her, but it was also an economic burden that year. For someone who makes less than $30,000 a year, and is constantly working, basically living off of our tips, I lost $6,000 in tips that year just from the loss of that one wolf. So it was a heavy blow, for me. I didn't even know if I was going to be able to actually stay here. And so this year, coupling all the other things that we're dealing with, and we're holding out hope for a winter season where we can actually get back to work, maybe see wolves regularly. And if we are constantly getting hammered with losing dominant pack members or important pack members, those packs then have serious social effects that happen to those packs where they start to disperse. Or as Evan said, they're just not as visible. Why would they want to be around humans if they're constantly getting killed by humans? And so these packs are already generally fairly accepting of people watching them. And so that makes them an easy target for hunters, for one. So it lessens the fair chase in my book. But then it also causes a trickle down effect for when they lose pack members, they remember that. And then they're going to be more likely to stay away from the roads. We're not going to be able to see them as easily. And then we're going to be losing, that ability to satisfy customers and give them the most exciting thing in the world, to see a large predator on the landscape here in Yellowstone National Park. So I'll just end it there and we can kind of keep talking.
Thanks, Evan and Shauna. And yeah, if you have any questions, either just put them in the chat or raise your hand, and be great to hear from people. But I also just wanted to check in with Nathan Varley and Ashea Mills, see if there's anything else that you wanted to add, or anyone else on the call. But just glad to check in and see if there's anything else that you think that is important to raise that we haven't discussed so far.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Jonathan. I'd love to just kind of follow up the great comments that the three previous speakers have offered to this audience. And I took a peek at our audience, and it was really nice to see so many familiar names out there. And I know you're all passionate, engaged people on this issue and others. So it's great to have this conversation. And in that context, I would kind of, from my perspective, doing wolf tours for 20 years and being part of an all-volunteer grassroots organization in Bear Creek Council, which is based in Gardner. I think I've kind of come to know that this sort of wolf issue is one of battling narratives. The facts matter to a certain extent. I think, the legislative intent to reduce wolf populations really wasn't based on a lot of great data that wolves are a problem in Montana. Sure, there are challenges that we face with wolves that we can address on the ground. But the idea behind, well, let's kill off as many wolves as we can, we'll have a lot fewer problems, is flawed. It's very intent. And it's not based on any kind of numbers that the state would give you based on, thriving elk populations and very low livestock depredations throughout the state. And so this has never really been about solving a problem. I think it creates more problems than they intend to solve here. And so it's also based on this idea that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks will tell us, oh, we did a survey. There's not very much tolerance for wolves in Montana. It's like, okay, I can understand there's some communities where there's not much tolerance, but I tend to believe that in the communities that actually kind of live with some wolves, there's quite a bit of tolerance. Gardner's obviously one outlier where there's a great deal of tolerance because their livelihoods are based in part on healthy wildlife populations, and wolves are among those. So I feel like to battle back against that narrative that Montanans don't want wolves, they're not going to speak out against killing off, annihilating our wolf population. I think that's where we all have to engage ourselves and others in our community and reach out to the friends that maybe a little more on the fence, maybe a little bit more intimidated to get involved with this issue. And I just think we're going to have to go there to overcome where we're at now to some extent. And it boggles my mind, the perspective that we're just fighting over a tiny slice of Montana next to Yellowstone Park. To me, that should not be controversial. That should be a given. We're not asking Montana to stop your annihilation of wolves throughout the state. We're just kind of fighting a battle on a very small piece of it here and finding it to be difficult because of how strong that narrative is throughout the rest of the state. So speak out. You might get out of your comfort zone a little bit. Always be respectful and try to engage in this conversation about the value of wolves to people. And I think only through those kinds of conversations and mobilizing more of our silent majority in the middle, will we really kind of get to a point where we're overcoming this narrative that was, led to the legislation, which led to the regulations about wolf hunting and this whole battle that we're fighting now. And I will offer one thing that Bear Creek Council has done is we designed our own plate, our own license plate. As you've seen traveling throughout Montana, there are many great license plates from nonprofit organizations. And ours features a Monty Dolak, wonderful graphic art image that I think a lot of you have seen of wolves in Yellowstone with that incredible Yellowstone classic background. And it says, the tagline on the plate is "Wolves belong." And that might be intimidating for many people to get. I get that, but I hope we can get a lot of people to get that plate. So it gets out there more that like, no, wait, this is a lot more, there's a lot more support for wolves on this issue than we ever thought. So that's in its final stages of being released by the state. We hope it'll kind of come out by the end of the summer, and encourage you to, there's a lot of great plates, and I know there's a lot of great nonprofits on this call that might have their own, but I would encourage you to stand up for wolves and do whatever you can, get the license plate or whatever you can. Certainly comment in the next 10 days on this deadline to reduce wolf harvest around Yellowstone Park for all the great reasons that people on this call have provided. So thanks for listening, and let's all do our part. And I'll toss it over to Ashea to talk a little bit more about her perspectives.
Thanks, Nathan, and to everybody. I think this is just an incredible cadre of colleagues with a century or more of experience on the ground. So just following up on what Nathan said, I really think one of the things that I would do is just ask us all to amplify that voice. I think it's easy to feel apathetic, and especially with some of this legislation. Jenny, you spoke so well earlier on giving us the bigger picture, but we all have been watching grizzlies and wolves and the delisting. Are they listed? Where are they listed or not? And it's easy to kind of lose sight of these razor sharp focused comments that we're asking for now. And it's easy to just, get overwhelmed with it. So I'm so grateful to all of the nonprofits and PCEC for keeping track, with different constituents. And then I think it's really interesting recently to have joined Wild Livelihoods and be a part of this conversation about economics, because I too came in 1995 was my first summer in Yellowstone. 4 months after the wolves, just kind of coincidentally, and did not know that I would be here nearly 30 years later, owning a small educational wildlife guiding company, and park-wide experience for folks coming in from around the world. But one thing that I'm hearing, kind of a common thread from everyone that we've heard from so far, is a passion for the landscape. It's not about the bottom line. It's a lifestyle. It's a chance for us to be in this special place. And then education, educating visitors on what's happening. And that's been a real shift in my time here, I think. Watching the more consumptive sort of economic landscape turn to a non-consumptive landscape. And especially right now, most of us, and I took a glance through our participants today, and thank you so much for being here. And I know we've got people that have been in the ecosystem their whole lives and have invested a lot of their resources into it. you know, these days, I think we all recognize that these very few precious pockets that are left on the planet that are mostly untrammeled, you know, that we still have the capability of sustaining things like grizzly bears and wolves, large predators on the landscape, are absolutely of the essence right now. And so, like Nathan said, jumping out of your comfort zone and you know, dropping a comment, you know, that might be, you know, as far into activism as you go, but it's critical. And especially for those of us that are living in the ecosystem, these local voices, amplifying each other. If you can talk one neighbor or one friend into joining you in that effort, and make those letters personal. They don't have to be long, just a sentence or two about your experience here and what it means to live and coexist with large predators. You know, it's interesting because I do still hear some neighbors talking about how scary wolves are and things like that. I have an about to be 10-year-old daughter who is very much born of this landscape, and raising a child on the edge of canyons and wild, crazy water, and being aware in bear country and being around wolves is such a gift. And it's not scary. It's not, you know, it's just like all other things when you're raising a child. Just pay attention and be careful, you know, do what you got to do to be safe on this landscape. And so I think just reminding our commissioners that so many of us really treasure that wildness. That is really what drives us. That's my why. I know that's true for a lot of us. So great background on the economics. You know, it's this most recent economic study that Wild Livelihoods and so many of the other people here have helped to produce has been, I think, a really telling thing about you know, it's not just a few of us that care about wolves and, you know, make our business out of it or whatever, but that it's really a strong component for the entire Park County, especially, and honestly, for the entire ecosystem. So I appreciate everything that was said before. And I think I just want to yeah, just amplify who's spoken before. And I think we've got tons of times for questions. So thanks for being here, and thanks for taking a few minutes to, I saw Carrie and Johnathan drop in some links and how to comment. And that's really the most important thing we can do right now, is to share our voices and our experiences and let our commissioners know that this is really important to us.
Thanks, Nathan and Ashea. So the public comment period is open until next Thursday, July 21st. Carrie put a link in to PCEC blog post that we wrote about how to comment. And so go there for more information, as well as some talking points. Or I'm sure that what we've heard from all of our great speakers today can also help inform your comments as well. So please take the time to do that. And yeah, we're accepting questions if people have them now. But I guess the first thing I just wanted to ask was, before we get started with that, is I was just kind of curious with the flood and with Yellowstone being closed and now open to a number of guides this summer, how has it been for the local guides and local businesses? What has business been like? How is access going? I didn't know if anyone wants to talk about that.
Sure, I'll answer that. Yeah, immediately after the flood, there was just a massive rush of cancellations with the roads being closed, and I think a lot of folks seeing some really scary headlines out of the park about, you know, the devastation that had happened, and it just kind of drew them off their vacations. And so there was a big wave of cancellations. And now with opening through the east and south and west entrances free flowing, people are starting to realize that a vacation here is still possible. With Gardner's limited entrance system that we have, the guides are still able to get in the mornings. It's a bit chaotic with scheduling and timing and ins and outs and all of that stuff, but we're we're working our tails off to try to figure it out and make it work and figure out how we can facilitate visitors still coming in through Gardner. Tours are still happening. There's a line of vehicles every morning waiting to get into the park. So, you know, every tour that we can sell out of Gardner is a hotel room and a dinner at a restaurant and maybe a stuffed animal from YF or whoever it is, and just getting tourism dollars back into town. And so, you know, obviously it's good for our businesses to run those trips, but I think it helps to let folks know that, like, yeah, we are still open for business, and it's in a little bit of a chaotic fashion at the moment, but we're figuring it out, and some patience and flexibility with us, we'll still get you in there and try to get you onto those animals that you're hoping to see. And you know, we were very, very fortunate, just a little side note, that the right after they opened the gates for us and let us started getting in through the north gates, a big, beautiful bull bison was kind enough to lay down and die in clean view. And we had multiple days of grizzly bears and wolves and all sorts of amazing sightings for a few days there. So yeah, it's still happening, and there's still wildlife to be seen in the park.
And Jonathan, I'll jump in quickly too. And I know it's been difficult in Gardner for the hotels and the restaurants and all the other businesses. So a reminder that Gardner will be having their Fireball Friday evening, and then Brewfest is also happening this weekend. You can visit the Gardner Chamber Facebook page and website. They've got all the information there, and also some really great itineraries that you can look at to encourage folks to visit Gardner even if they can't get into the park. So just a brief reminder for the community of Gardner.
You know, I think I'd like to add, you know, Evan was talking about, you know, it has been a bit chaotic, just kind of figuring things out and working with the schedules and, you know, working to get in the park, you know, each day and setting that up. But honestly, that's kind of the behind the scenes stuff, right? For the guide companies and for, you know, for myself as well as a guide, you know, working as a guide, the process getting in this past few days has actually been pretty easy. The behind the scenes stuff is a little bit unnerving, and we might have to ask our clients, well, be patient. I'm not sure if we can get in today or tomorrow, but if you're here for a couple of days, we're going to get you in. And then the process at the gate was very easy. They've been making it very easy on us. We've been able to adjust the schedules to make sure that we make those, you know, exit times and things like that. And so it's running pretty smooth. It's stressful on our end for things, I think, but I think for the client, they don't really know any of that. And that's great. And that's the way it should be. But we are pulling it off. And I think that's a really important message to get out there, that if you come to Gardner for a couple of days, you know, if you want to get in the park, we'll get you in. And I think we can really make it happen. And we're adding more and more of that ability every day. And, you know, being that we're just a month out from a flood, I think we've done incredibly well at pulling all this together, and hopefully we'll start getting more and more bookings. Yeah.
That's true. And I can't tell you how impressed I've been. I mean, you know, a month ago, we thought we were done for the season. You know, I think we all just thought that's a wrap on 2022 summer. And so it's been really powerful to watch, you know, all of the attention and the coordination between the park and the forest and, you know, state government and local government coming together, and, you know, economic interests to be able to help sustain, you know, what is definitely a very different looking season. And I know each of us individually have all pivoted in different ways and, you know, tried to get creative. We're just about to start offering Grand Loop tours, which we've never been able to do, but with mixed groups. So that's something, you know, for locals that maybe can't, you know, swing a whole day private day tour. You can come in and, you know, buy a couple of seats, and we'll still get down to Old Faithful and the Grand Canyon and try to find some wildlife. You know, I think it's forced some of us into getting you know, creative. A couple of us have been operating out of West for a couple of weeks and working with some guide companies over there. So yeah, thank you, Shauna. I think that's really important. And I do think, you know, those economic studies that have been mentioned too are important, that, you know, one live wolf and the amount of, you know, economic power that brings in is not just about a guiding company. It's about, a meal in a local restaurant. It's about, maybe a raft trip the next day, or, heads in beds, right? And keeping an economy that's thriving in these small towns where we are based on, some seasonality. So I think those are great reminders, while also remembering that, we love the diversity that those wolves bring, and the ecological balance as well.
Great. Thank you. And Clint Nagel, I see you have your hand raised. Would you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I had a question. I apologize, my internet's been in and out all morning, so I may have missed this. If I have, I apologize. But is there a biological rationale given by the Fish, Wildlife, or Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, or the commission, about why they are combining the two wolf districts, hunting districts, 313 and 316 together? And why would they want to basically eliminate the hunting districts and use trapping districts for the management of wolves?
Jenny, do you?
I can jump in on that. Yeah. Hey, Clint, we know each other.
Yeah.
Nice to hear from you. Yeah, I think a lot of us have been puzzling, trying to understand if there's anything deeper and scarier going on under the scenes behind that move.
Right.
So at the statewide level, just for everyone's benefit, what they're trying to do is eliminate all of the wolf management units in the state and move to trapping districts. Trapping districts are much larger and kind of mirror the region. So it would seem to be a way for the agency to sort of simplify and reduce the level of detail and flexibility that they have with stepping in, to change or tweak things in individual smaller units. So I think it is concerning from that perspective. I can't imagine what biological reason FWP would be able to provide in terms of a rationale for that. I think there's also some speculation and worry that might be a move that's helping set up for bills that might be likely coming down the pipeline for the next legislative session. But at this point, like, my information is speculation, and I haven't seen any biological basis to be doing that.
Yeah, I haven't either. And I, like you, I think there's something sinister going on, but I don't have any proof of that other than the fact of their history. But well, what you said makes sense.
If anyone else on the call has insight, please share.
I have just a thought about that. I think, and again, this is speculation. I haven't heard this from hard data points, but geographically, if you look at 313 and 316, and you look at the harvest of wolves out of 316 over the last several years, it all happens in the fall because so much of that WMU is essentially inaccessible once the snow starts to fall. And this is, again, just my personal thought. I don't wonder if it allows them to create a larger geographic area where it kind of dilutes down the total number of wolves being taken because you've made a larger unit out of it, knowing that after kind of mid-October, when the elk hunting dies down in 316, it allows for more wolves to be taken out of 313, and it's justified by being just such a much larger area now. And that's, I don't know, just kind of my own. That was my first thought when I heard that they were doing it, that might be a reason why they lean on that.
Yeah, I would think there'd have to be an advantage somewhere, or else they wouldn't bother with it. And that's what makes me curious as well as suspicious. But thank you.
Thanks, Clint, for your question. And Jenny, Lil Erickson asked, will there be an in-person meeting of the commission to decide this? So can you kind of help explain what is happening with the public comment period and the in-person meeting in August?
Yeah, I can do my best, right? So the commission has another meeting set for the 25th. I think the website has been provided in the chat. I believe that there will be both in-person and virtual opportunities to comment. In the past, at least, it's been the kind of thing where I believe you have to register in advance. I haven't seen a link to do that. I'm not sure if anyone else has yet, or maybe it's coming down the pipeline. Oh, thanks, Jonathan, for putting that in the chat. You know, it's a little tricky because the process for commission season setting has been changed a little bit in the past 6 months or so. And they say it's an effort to be more transparent, but it actually feels a lot more opaque in terms of trying to figure out when are the opportunities to plug in and how do you do that. I have seen some places that say there will be opportunity for public comment to show up at the meeting and comment, or to, give an oral comment during that commission meeting, and especially if there's an amendment. So what we might see during that commission meeting, and actually what I hope we'll see, is an amendment introduced to reduce the quota far below 10, and then the commission will deliberate on that decision, and they will have to take, I believe, public comment on that decision. So I think that we're hoping that that's going to happen, and if it does, it will be an important time for local voices to weigh in and support, to help pressure the commissioners who are more resistant to reducing that quota. But it's hard to say how it's going to play out with certainty, because things are changing and I'm seeing some conflicting information about it, but that's how I hope it'll happen.
Thanks. Catherine Iverson, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, hello. My husband and I are cabin owners in Silvergate. We're back home in Minneapolis. We were there for the floods, and it certainly was an interesting time to experience our beloved place. Couple things. One is that, we have a lot of quiet now in Silvergate and Cook City, and we've come to recognize the thousands and thousands of people and dollars that come through this area. And it's absolutely a gold mine for Montana. It's just, between the resort taxes and all the other livelihoods that are sustained, I just think that the wolves fit into that whole economic sphere, and it needs to be emphasized. I mean, especially those of us that live outside the state, we really, really appreciate the value of what's going on. And then the other question I have is, Jennifer, do you know if like Trout Unlimited knows about what's going on? Because there's been tremendous research done on the importance of wolves in terms of sustaining the waters for fishing. They keep the waters. The reason the wolves are so helpful is they keep the elk populations down and the other ungulates, and then those grasses are allowed to grow. Those willows are allowed to grow alongside the streams, and it provides cooling for our fishes. And with climate change, it's clear we need as much cooling as we can get. So just curious if anybody's reached out to them, and I guess I'll do it if you need me to.
Thanks so much, Catherine, for sharing that. And that's an interesting idea. I haven't seen Trout Unlimited plugging into these issues. I think some groups maybe, are wary of weighing in on something so polarizing, but I agree this wolf issue reaches far and wide, and it would be interesting if you do reach out to them to know what their position is, but I certainly can't speak for them.
One thing to note is Pat Byorth, our local commissioner, does work for Trout Unlimited, so he is quite aware of those impacts too. But I'm sure that would be a good way to, or a good group to try and engage potentially. But yes, so he brings that lens to the commission. Is
Jonathan,
there?
it looks like Laura Burks had a comment or a question in the chat from further on. I don't know if anyone has the answer to this one, but is anyone following this wildlife bill in the US Congress, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, curious how it links to wolves? So I don't know if anybody's keyed into that yet or not. I don't have any background on that. Jenny, do you have anything?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to RAWA, as it's called. My understanding is that it's going to be directing funds, if it passes, it will primarily direct funds at sort of species identified as being in conservation need, species at risk. And so Montana already has a sort of plan of laying out which species are considered at risk or in need. And so when it comes to Montana, I don't think those funds would be able to apply to wolves, but possibly in other states. And it could apply to grizzly bears, for example, since they're still listed as threatened here. And I believe they appear as a species at risk or in conservation need. So yeah, my understanding is that in Montana, at least, the funding will not necessarily like directly help wolves in any way.
Thanks. Well, I think we've only got 3 minutes left, and we try and stay committed to keeping these to an hour. Does anyone have any closing thoughts they'd like to share? Or yeah, just make sure that you are able to submit your comments by next Thursday, July 21st, to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. But yeah, if anyone has any closing comments, let me know. Just come off mute.
I think we're speaking to the choir here, but I just wanted to thank everyone for their passion and commitment to this issue, for letting me be a part of this. And I think it's really important. You know, it was important before the flood, but now it's doubly so, that we come together as a community to really figure out, you know, what do we want to fight for and how do we keep this community viable? And wolves is a huge part of that, that story. And so I feel like we have a lot of, I don't know, for me right now, I feel like we have a lot of fuel behind us that we can really get this fire burning, to be able to push, you know, for more. I'm grateful that they were willing to even instill a quota of 10, but that's not good enough. And I think that's where we have the power right now to say it's not good enough and this is what we need as a community. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Shauna, and thanks to all of our panelists and speakers today. This was a really great conversation, and great thanks to everyone for turning out. We will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who registered, and we'll include links on how to comment, as well as our talking points, and a link to this recording today if you want to share it with your friends or people you're working with. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. Thanks.